I've got here before me all of the t-34 mods that are possible, and every part that is a challenge to cut. So this is the t-34-85, this is the SU-85, and this is the t-34-76. And this is parts of the main chassis, which all of them share. So one of the first things I wanted to cover was these parts here are a little bit challenging. And also, like, generally, when you're cutting out the template, you want to cut right along the lines or just outside of them, but you don't want to cut inside or cut too much off, because you can never recover from that, but you can always trim or sand off extra if you've left too much on. So keeping that in mind, try to be fairly careful, and if you can, right in the center of the line is the perfect spot. But obviously that's not going to be super easy. Now when you're doing like little circular parts like this, I just recommend you go really slow and turn the work into the scissors rather than trying to turn the scissors around the work as you go. And that will be making things a little bit easier for you. You can see I just left this part here on until I was ready to come from around this side, because I'm not left-handed or using left-handed scissors, so some of the back cuts are a little tougher. But you still don't need an X-Acto knife or box cutter for that. So this here is a little bit, it changes angles, so you'll want to come at it from one side and then finish it from the other. It's not a huge change in angles, but it's too much to just turn your scissors into. These parts here, this is actually 3 parts, but I generally, well, actually I always leave it as 1 until I'm ready to deploy it, because the parts are so small, they're quite easy to misplace, and since they are sort of attached to each other anyways, I just cut them out like this and then set them aside until I'm ready to use them, and then I'll cut the bits off as I need them. Same with this part in the center is also exactly that same way. It's 2 parts. Well, it's not 3 parts, but it's 2 parts. And I just keep them as 1 because this part's pretty easy to lose. So I'll just cut this out. And save it. Now you can see that there's a few parts here with double black lines. Like this, like this, like these. You want to cut on the outside of the black line. Don't cut the interior one. And you can even cut them a little bit large if you want to, especially if you're using very thin cardboard, because these are beveled pieces, so you're going to end up cutting it back anyways. But sometimes if you have just a little bit extra, it can make the beveling process look a little smoother when you're done. It doesn't make it any easier, but it makes it look a little bit more like a flat, continuous surface rather than sort of a stepped surface, especially since there's some variation to how the model goes together. Okay, so now this part here, it's got some bevels in front, and then it's got this part here, and this is like what I would refer to as an interior cut. And these you can access the interior cut with scissors, but you pretty much always have to use a blade to cut it out. And the best way to do that is to do a couple of slices from one side and then go to the other side and do a couple of slices the other way, and you'll chip it out. The only reason I wouldn't just keep slicing one direction is because you'll end up cutting into this a little bit before you actually pop the piece off. Same thing with this part. And the one, because it's so small, if you were to cut it this and this now, it would be really tough to handle. So leave it long like this. Cut in. With your scissors, and then use the knife to pop that out. Similar to the where you did the one we just did. So a couple strokes from one direction, and just turn it around and you should be able to pop it out pretty quick. With this one, you don't need to leave these little bits at the end. They're handles for the saw, actually, was what they are. But just cut them off. It's just kind of to show you what the part is until it's been cut out. These rounded corners here can be a challenge to make, especially at first. So I'm going to show you a trick as to how to get them nice so that you don't have to try to turn it into the scissors and match it up on both sides. It can be quite difficult. So what I do is I'll cut it as a square and then just nip these corners off at a 45, and then you can see that there's little bits that you can nip from that 45 that you created to make a nice rounded shape. So I wanted to cover the t-34 turret here a little bit. This again is gonna be 2 pieces, but just cut it out as one and save it. It's a lot easier to do so. And with circles that are small like this, sort of similarly to how we cut that half circle in the back, just cut it real slow, and instead of trying to turn the scissors, turn the work into the scissors. And literally I'm just tiny little chops with the scissors, not cutting very much at all. So you just cut them out, but turning the scissors like this can be a bit of a hassle. So again, just try to go slow enough so that you can, so if you do start cutting the wrong direction, you can change your angle of attack or try to find another direction to come from. And I thought maybe I should mention that before you start cutting out the template, you really want to kind of examine it and make sure you know, like, there is a key so you can kind of see, okay, all of these lines, these are cue card paper parts, these don't need to be cut out, that's a dotted score guide. So kind of really know where you're going to cut before you start cutting the pieces out, because as you get them cut from the template, for me anyways, the colors start to meld together and stuff, and it's hard to tell what's a blue line and what's a black line just at a glance. And so you might end up accidentally cutting some stuff incorrectly if you haven't studied carefully first. So it's just my 2 cents with. So this arm for me is going to be a lot easier to cut, but it would be the hard one for a left-handed person. If you start finding there's too much cardboard kind of under your scissors and keeping you from turning your scissors, you can just cut that bit of cardboard off, unless it's, of course, part of the template. For the Su-85 tank destroyer, this is 2 parts, and you can see it's got the rounded curve here. This rounded one kind of is rounded all the way, so just follow it rounded rather than trying to do the 45 unless you absolutely need it. And again, you have that rounded zone here. This is 2 parts, and it actually overhangs this fold but doesn't fold with it, so it's a little bit of an odd part. We'll cover that later. And but just leave these as 1 part again until you're ready to deploy them. And that's it for this. The actual SU-85 superstructure, it's all straight, all easy to cut out. There should be no problems with that. So again, these are tiny, tiny pieces, so you just have to cut them out as best as you can. And set them aside. So I would recommend, actually, I did that a little bit wrong, cutting the rounded part first, because that's the challenging part of the cut, and then cutting the straight parts. Same for this. Cut the rounded, and then cut it out. Else you got nothing to grip. Couple things in here. There's one inside part that you need to use the blade to cut out. That will be here. And this can be a little bit of a challenge to get out. You can use the knife, but I have had pretty decent success just using scissors. And I'll show you how I've got that to work. Just kind of slowly get about halfway with the scissors as you turn it and slice, and then come from the other side. And you should be able to finish it and keep it fairly rounded. Nice. So you'll never get the whole turn, but you can turn enough from each direction to make it meet fairly nice. And I find it's hard to make rounded cuts with the blade in such a small area. It's actually a little bit easier with the scissors. You can try it with the blade as well, but just for me, I find it easier that way. Make sure there's no missing parts here. Okay. Right. So cutting this out is a little bit, I mean, this is the only hard part here I'm showing you, so I'll stop after this. And keep in mind you're going to change angles a little bit at that spot, but it's a small enough angle change that you can just use scissors to do it. And then generally I'll cut to there and then cut this off, and then I'll bring the knife in and cut from here back. Should be able to just pop that out. So like